An elderly woman with graying hair, a soft voice, and a smile that never seemed to leave her face. Yet police unearthed 7 bodies in her backyard. On an ordinary street in Sacramento, California, this woman ran a modest boarding house that appeared to be full of kindness. She took in people from the very bottom of society, the homeless, those with mental illnesses, and elderly individuals living on government assistance. In the freezing winter, she would serve them a bowl of hot soup, help them fill out welfare forms, and remind them to take their medication on time. But the very people who once sat at her table, eating her food, whom she affectionately called her children, were ultimately buried in the soil she had dug with her own hands. And this kindly old woman, who looked as though she wouldn't even harm a fly, was later labeled by police as the landlady killer, Dorothea Puente. Dorothea chose her victims with a smile, built trust through care and concern, and then put a price on each life using welfare checks. This was not a crime of passion soaked in blood, but a coldly calculated, benevolent slaughter that lasted for years. What is truly chilling is that right up until the case was exposed, not a single neighbor around her ever suspected her. Dorothea Helen Puente was born on January 9, 1929, into a poor family in Riverside, California. That year, the United States was under the shadow of the Great Depression, and for the already impoverished Puente family, life became even harder. Both of Dorothea's parents were severe alcoholics, and there were 7 children in the household. Dorothea was the 6th, by far the most overlooked of them all. As a result, Dorothea's childhood memories held no warm embraces or decent meals, only beatings from drunken parents and endless indifference. Desperate to escape this suffocating home, she ran away multiple times only to be dragged back each time and met with even harsher punishment. Eventually, because her parents were unable to support the family, she and her siblings were sent one by one into foster care. However, foster care did not become her safe haven. In her first foster home, she continued to suffer abuse. After being moved to a second and then a third home, nothing improved. Years of trauma gradually twisted Dorothea's personality. She became increasingly sensitive and suspicious, distrustful of everyone around her. At the same time, she slowly lost her sense of empathy. In her world, only she herself deserved concern. Everyone else was merely a tool to be used. Thus, in 1948, at the age of 19, Dorothea stepped onto the path of crime for the first time. In order to survive, she forged multiple checks and defrauded local shops of goods. She was soon arrested by the police, marking her first time in prison. Although her sentence was not long, the experience did not lead to remorse. Instead, it gave her a taste of the rewards of getting something for nothing. She realized that as long as she was smart enough, she could easily trick others into giving her whatever she wanted. After her release, Dorothea did not look for an honest job. Instead, relying on her looks, she mingled with shady characters at a bar in California and eventually began running a brothel. Through this work, she came into contact with large numbers of people living on the margins of society: alcoholics, the homeless, and those with mental illnesses. In dealing with them, she gradually identified their weaknesses: loneliness, helplessness, a deep desire for attention, and a lack of basic self-protection. These insights laid the groundwork for her later crimes. For the first half of her life, Dorothea survived in a constant state of stealing and deception. Then, in 1982, at the age of 50, she was once again arrested after drugging an elderly person and stealing their belongings. This time, she was sentenced to 5 years in prison, but due to good behavior, she served only 3 years before being released. When she left prison, she was already 53 years old, her hair gray, looking aged and helpless. By then, Dorothea was well aware that her criminal record would affect the rest of her life, so she deliberately set out to remake her image. She stopped wearing revealing clothes and instead dressed in plain floral sweaters and cloth shoes. She no longer frequented bars or similar places, but stayed home tending to flowers and plants every day. She also took the initiative to volunteer in the community, helping care for elderly people who lived alone. Before long, she won the goodwill of those around her, and everyone came to see her as a reformed, warm-hearted old woman. More importantly, she proactively reached out to local social welfare agencies. She tearfully recounted her tragic past to social workers, saying that she wanted to help homeless elderly people and individuals with disabilities by running a boarding house. Her image as a kind, approachable elderly woman was simply too convincing, and at the time, social service agencies were indeed under pressure to find placements. The social workers quickly believed her and recommended her as a reliable boarding house operator. And just like that, Dorothea's hunting plan officially began. The boarding house Dorothea chose as her base was located at 1426 F Street in Sacramento. It was an old house in a typical residential neighborhood with both a front and a backyard. Though not large, it could accommodate more than a dozen people. To make the house look like a warm refuge, Dorothea put a great deal of effort into it. She kept the rooms spotless, replaced the sheets and bedding in every room, planted roses and various vegetables throughout the yard, and cooked a large pot of hot soup every day, filling the entire house with the smell of food. The surrounding neighbors all believed that Dorothea was doing something good. They often saw elderly people and individuals with disabilities coming and going from the house, most of them wearing calm smiles and appearing quite satisfied with life there. No one could have imagined that this seemingly warm home would soon turn into a place of death. Dorothea's criteria for selecting her prey were very clear. They had to be socially marginalized, invisible people. She chose these individuals for three main reasons. First, most of them had no family or friends, so if they went missing, few people would actively look for them. Second, they suffered from physical or mental impairments, making them easy to control. Third, most of them had stable sources of income, such as Social Security benefits, something Dorothea valued above all else. To lure these prey in willingly, Dorothea precisely targeted their needs. To elderly people living alone, she promised a warm home and vowed to care for them like a devoted daughter, allowing them to live out their later years in comfort. To those with mental illnesses, she promised a quiet environment, reminders to take their medication on time, and regular walks to help them gradually get better. And to the homeless, she directly offered stable housing and plentiful food, so they would no longer have to worry about exposure to the elements. Beyond that, Dorothea also made a point of cultivating close relationships with local social workers. She frequently invited them to her home, serving homemade cookies and hot soup, and reported on the boarding house, explaining how carefully she looked after the residents. Seeing how dedicated Dorothea appeared, and noting that the people placed there all seemed satisfied, the social workers trusted her even more. As a result, they began proactively referring hard-to-place marginalized individuals to Dorothea's boarding house, even listing it as an officially recommended placement. It was precisely because of this endorsement from social workers that more and more marginalized people walked into Dorothea's boarding house and into the carefully woven death trap she had prepared. The first prey to move in was 61-year-old Ruth Monroe. Ruth was an elderly woman living alone. Her husband had died years earlier. She had no children, and her only relative was a nephew who lived in another city. She suffered from mild depression and received a fixed amount of Social Security benefits each month. On the recommendation of a social worker, Ruth found her way to Dorothea. Dorothea welcomed her warmly, arranged a sunlit room for her, and cooked her a bowl of hot soup. Touched by Dorothea's kindness, Ruth decided to move in that very day. What she never imagined was that once she moved in, she would never walk out again. After years of observation and preparation, Dorothea had already developed a complete and systematic method for committing her crimes. From gaining trust to ultimately burying the bodies, every step was carefully planned and tightly connected. The first step was taking control of the victim's finances. This was the core purpose of Dorothea's crimes and her primary means of controlling her victims. With newly arrived residents, Dorothea would act especially caring. She would take the initiative to look after their daily lives and help solve small problems, going to the pharmacy to pick up medication for Ruth, paying her utility bills, and so on. Once she had gained their initial trust, she would begin to infiltrate their finances, using excuses like, "There are so many scammers these days and you're older. It's easy to be taken advantage of." Or, "You have mental health issues, so it's not safe for you to manage money on your own." She would persuade victims to hand over their Social Security debit cards, ID cards, and passbooks for her to manage. She promised to save the money for them and give it back whenever they needed it. For lonely and helpless victims, Dorothea's concern brought a long-missed sense of warmth, and they easily came to trust this kindly grandmother figure. Ruth Monroe was persuaded in exactly this way. She handed over her Social Security debit card and ID to Dorothea and even told her the PIN. As soon as Dorothea had these in hand, she went straight to the bank and withdrew the money. According to later police investigations, Ruth received more than $800 in Social Security benefits each month. Dorothea withdrew almost all of it, leaving Ruth with only a small amount for daily expenses. To keep Ruth from discovering the truth, she even forged bank statements, telling Ruth that the money was safely saved and that there was nothing to worry about. For victims who were slightly more cautious, Dorothea used more covert methods. One example was 52-year-old Alvaro Montoya, a man with schizophrenia. Although he was mentally ill, he was very protective of his money. Dorothea first focused on taking care of his daily needs, helping him get dressed, feeding him, and accompanying him on walks every day. Once Alvaro fully trusted her, she secretly copied his bank card. She then added small amounts of sleeping pills to his food, and while he was unconscious, she went to the bank to withdraw money. The second step was murder by drugs, Dorothea's most commonly used method. The advantage of this approach was that it was silent and difficult to detect. From her earlier crimes in her youth, Dorothea had already learned the effectiveness of sleeping pills, so this time she deliberately chose the powerful sedative flurazepam. This drug has a strong effect, putting people into a deep sleep and, in high doses, causing death through respiratory depression. Dorothea would grind the flurazepam into powder and secretly mix it into her victims' food, drinks, or soup. With more compliant victims like Ruth Monroe, she would simply add the drug directly to their meals. With victims like Alvaro Montoya, who sometimes resisted, she would first add a small amount of the sedative to their drinks to make them drowsy, then force-feed them more, even using tape to bind their hands and feet to prevent them from struggling. In 1982, less than a month after Ruth Monroe moved into Dorothea's boarding house, she was killed using this method. According to later forensic reports, the level of flurazepam found in Ruth's body far exceeded the normal dosage and was the direct cause of her death. After killing Ruth, Dorothea calmly dealt with the scene, thoroughly cleaned Ruth's room, and destroyed anything that might have left behind evidence. The third step was disposing of the body, a crucial part of covering up her crimes. Dorothea knew that as long as the bodies were never found, her crimes would remain hidden. So she chose to bury them in her own backyard, both convenient and discreet. Every night after all the residents had fallen asleep, Dorothea would take a shovel into the backyard and dig pits beneath the rose bushes. She wrapped the bodies in black plastic sheets, placed them in the pits, filled them back in with soil, and then planted roses or vegetables on top to conceal the traces. To prevent the smell of decomposition from spreading, Dorothea also scattered large amounts of lime and chlorine into the pits. The lime accelerated decomposition, while the chlorine masked the stench. Although neighbors occasionally noticed strange odors, Dorothea would brush them off by saying that fertilizer in the yard was fermenting, successfully deflecting suspicion. From 1982 to 1988, over a span of 6 years, Dorothea's assembly line of death operated at full speed. She continuously lured victims into moving in, took control of their finances, killed them with sleeping pills, and then buried their bodies in the backyard. According to later police investigations, at least 9 victims died at her hands, and all 9 were among society's most marginalized and helpless invisible people. Although Dorothea's disguise seemed flawless, the truth could not be hidden forever. In 1988, a social worker named Judy Moyes became the key figure in exposing these shocking crimes. Judy worked for a local social welfare agency in Sacramento, where her primary responsibility was arranging housing and providing support for people with mental illnesses. 52-year-old Alvaro Montoya was one of the clients under her care. In August 1988, Judy referred Alvaro to Dorothea's boarding house. Under standard procedures, Judy was required to meet with Alvaro regularly to check on his living conditions. At first, everything went smoothly. Each time Judy visited the boarding house to see Alvaro, Dorothea welcomed her warmly and proactively spoke about Alvaro's good behavior. Although Alvaro was mentally ill, he always greeted Judy with a happy smile, which led her to believe that he was living well there. However, in October 1988, the situation suddenly changed. When Judy arrived for a scheduled visit, Dorothea told her, "Alvaro has gone to Mexico to visit relatives and may not be back for a while." Judy did not think much of it at the time, though she found it a bit strange. Alvaro had no relatives in Mexico, so why would he suddenly go there? Over the following month, Judy contacted Dorothea several more times to ask about Alvaro's situation. Dorothea's answers, however, were inconsistent. Sometimes she said Alvaro was still in Mexico and doing well. Other times she said he had already returned but was staying with another relative. And sometimes she claimed she didn't know where he was, saying he had left without telling her. Dorothea's unusual behavior made Judy increasingly suspicious. She began to realize that something was not right. Determined to get answers, Judy decided to investigate on her own. She first contacted all of Alvaro's relatives and friends, but they all said they had not seen him and knew nothing about any trip to Mexico. Judy then went to the local police station to file a report, hoping the police would help locate Alvaro. However, the police response left her deeply disappointed. The police believed that Alvaro was simply a mentally ill person who had wandered off, something they considered fairly common. As a result, because Alvaro belonged to a marginalized group and lacked sufficient social value, the police did not take Judy's report seriously. They made only a brief record of the case, and then there was no follow-up. Faced with the police's indifference, Judy did not give up. She knew that if she failed to keep pushing, Alvaro might disappear forever. She began staking out the area near Dorothea's boarding house every day, watching what was going on inside. During this ongoing surveillance, Judy did in fact notice several unusual things. She observed that Dorothea's behavior was very strange. She often went out very late, always wearing a hat and a mask, wrapping herself up tightly. She also spent a great deal of time working in the backyard, especially late at night when the sound of a shovel digging could frequently be heard. Judy reported these observations to the police once again and strongly urged them to investigate Dorothea's backyard. This time, the police were finally moved by Judy's persistence. On November 7, 1988, two officers went to Dorothea's boarding house to ask about Alvaro's whereabouts. Dorothea remained calm and composed, smiling as she told the officers, "Alvaro really did go to Mexico. He took his belongings with him when he left. If you don't believe me, you can check his room." The officers followed Dorothea into Alvaro's room, which was indeed clean and orderly. Since they found no evidence, the police had no choice but to temporarily accept Dorothea's explanation and leave the boarding house. When Judy learned of this outcome, she felt anxious and frustrated, but she did not lose heart. Convinced that Dorothea was lying, she continued to keep watch near the boarding house, waiting for another opportunity. 4 days later, on November 11, 1988, Judy contacted the police again. She told them that Alvaro was very likely no longer alive, that there was definitely something wrong with Dorothea's backyard, and insisted that the police dig it up. This time, the police came back to Dorothea's boarding house with shovels. They did not listen to Dorothea's explanations, but instead went straight into the backyard and began digging beneath the rose bushes. Before long, the shovels struck something solid. The officers carefully cleared away the soil, and a sheet of black plastic emerged. When they pulled it back, a decomposed body appeared before them. The body was not Alvaro's, but that of 78-year-old Leona Carpenter, another elderly resident of Dorothea's boarding house. Dorothea's crimes had finally begun to come to light. When the first body was unearthed, Dorothea knew that her crimes had been exposed. She had to escape as quickly as possible, or she would be arrested. She began looking for a chance to run. That afternoon, a light rain began to fall, and the scene grew chaotic. Taking advantage of a moment when the police were distracted, Dorothea pretended to go inside to get a coat, then slipped out through the back door. She broke into a run, left the neighborhood behind, and vanished into the rain. Once the police realized Dorothea had fled, they immediately launched a manhunt. They issued a citywide wanted notice throughout Sacramento, complete with Dorothea's photograph and basic information. At the same time, the police contacted the media, hoping to enlist public help in locating her. In this way, Dorothea's killing spree drew widespread public attention. Media outlets rushed to report on the backyard burial case, and the stark contrast between Dorothea's kindly grandmother image and her brutal crimes shocked the entire nation. People could hardly believe that such an ordinary-looking elderly woman could be a serial killer. By this time, Dorothea had already fled to Los Angeles. Knowing that her appearance was easy to recognize, she assumed a new identity, dyed her hair, and dressed in fashionable clothes. She dared not stay in legitimate hotels and could only take rooms in cheap motels. Because she had fled in such a hurry, she was carrying very little cash, and it was soon spent. Accustomed to getting something for nothing, Dorothea never considered finding a job. Instead, she returned to her old ways, setting her sights on elderly people in Los Angeles bars. She would strike up conversations with older men drinking alone, use her gentle and attentive manner to gain their trust, and then ask about their income. On November 17, 1988, Dorothea met an elderly man named Charles Cummings at a bar in Los Angeles. Charles was in his 70s, a retired worker who received a fixed pension each month. Dorothea and Charles chatted easily, and Dorothea repeatedly praised him as charming and kind, even pouring drinks for him. As the conversation went on, Dorothea began asking about Charles's income. Charles found this strange. He had just met her, yet she was already inquiring about his finances and even offering to manage his money. That was highly abnormal. As Charles looked her over more closely, he suddenly remembered a wanted notice he had seen on television a few days earlier. The woman in front of him looked very much like Dorothea on the notice, except for the different hair color. The more he thought about it, the more frightened he became. Using the excuse of going to the restroom, he secretly called the police. After receiving the call, the police rushed to the bar. When officers appeared in front of Dorothea, she still tried to deny it. "You've got the wrong person. I'm not Dorothea. I'm Donna Johnson," she said. But the police were not fooled. They pulled out the wanted notice and compared it to her, confirming that she was indeed the fugitive serial killer Dorothea Puente. Faced with irrefutable evidence, Dorothea finally gave up resisting. She was handcuffed and placed into a police car. Only 6 days after fleeing from Sacramento to Los Angeles, the blood-stained landlady killer was captured. After Dorothea's arrest, the case entered a long judicial process. In order to gather evidence, police invested enormous time and effort. They uncovered a total of 7 bodies in Dorothea's backyard and later confirmed 2 additional victims through further investigation, bringing the total number of identified victims to 9. In 1993, the trial of Dorothea Puente officially began. The courtroom was packed with many relatives of the victims in attendance, hoping to seek justice for their loved ones. The prosecution submitted a total of 3,100 pieces of evidence, including autopsy reports of the victims, Dorothea's prior criminal records, the victims' financial records, and testimony from neighbors and social workers. The prosecution argued that Dorothea Puente, driven by financial gain, deliberately lured socially marginalized people into her boarding house and then murdered 9 victims through financial control, drugging, and burial of the bodies. Her actions were described as extremely cruel and posed a grave danger to society. The prosecution requested that the court sentence her to death. Dorothea herself, however, maintained her innocence throughout the trial. Crying before the jury, she said, "I didn't kill anyone. I never harmed anyone. Those people were my friends and I took good care of them. They died of natural causes. I only helped handle their arrangements afterward." She also tried to win over the jury with her kindly image, repeatedly emphasizing that she was old and in poor health, hoping to gain their sympathy. After 24 days of intense deliberation, the jury reached a verdict. Dorothea Puente was found guilty on 3 counts of first-degree murder. However, the jury was unable to reach a unanimous decision on the remaining 6 murder charges. Under California law, a death sentence requires a unanimous jury decision. Because the jury was divided on the other 6 counts, Dorothea could not be sentenced to death. Ultimately, the judge sentenced Dorothea Puente to life in prison without the possibility of parole. In later years, many people came to suspect that Dorothea may have killed more than 9 victims. Subsequent police investigations found that during the 6 years she operated the boarding house, many marginalized individuals had lived there and later vanished without a trace. Some media reports speculated that Dorothea may have killed as many as 25 people, but without sufficient evidence, these claims could not be confirmed. On March 27, 2011, Dorothea Puente died of natural causes at the California Institution for Women at the age of 82. This serial killer, whose hands were stained with blood, finally brought her life of crime to an end. Until her death, she never admitted her guilt, leaving behind the secret of whether she had claimed even more victims as she departed this world forever.